the invocation mantra, mantras of gratitude and respect to the principle of teaching and to our individual teachers. Timurannasya Gunanjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Guruve Chaitanya Manovistam Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kodamayam Tadati Swapodantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastitade Shatarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasani Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Welcome everybody to this evening's session, discussion, Bhagavad Gita with me, Laksmi. So happy to see you all with me. We are going to start on a very nice chapter. This is chapter 6. And chapter 6 is called Dhyana Yoga. Krishna mentions in the course of the Gita many different perspectives on yoga. When we say yoga system, yoga means one, really. and that is the strategy or the approach to link up with the Supreme. That's literally the meaning of yoga. So Krishna mentions a number of different perspectives on the strategy of yoga. In other words, how to link up using our actions, using our mind, using our intelligence, using our senses, using what we have at our disposal right now, right here in this world, and using that in such a way to create a strategy by which we can link up the essential us, meaning the soul, the Atma, the Jiva. Krishna makes a distinction between two aspects or two dimensions of our existence. One is the material dimension, the external dimension, that which we see, touch, hear, etc. And then the internal dimension of our existence, which is the actual source of consciousness. In other words, these elements which comprise our body is not the source of consciousness according to Bhagavad Gita. Elements such as earth, water, fire, air, ether, the mind, the intelligence, and the ego is not the source, but the source comes from another dimension of existence, which is the spiritual dimension of existence. And that is our essential nature according to the Gita. And how we link up to it is depending on what path we take, what road do we take, what strategy do we adhere ourselves to. So this is the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Dhyana Yoga. And we'll read, this is the first verse. I'll read only the English so that we can move on at a good pace. Dhyana Yoga. In chapter 5, Krishna explained how to achieve liberation through Nishkama Karma Yoga. And Nishkama means without desire for the results of my actions. That yoga, that strategy. And at the end of the chapter, he explained how to achieve that same liberation through Ashtanga Yoga. So the 6th chapter, or Dhyana Yoga, Krishna mentions here in the Ashtanga Yoga system. Ashtanga means the 8 limbs. In the history of yoga, all throughout the various sacred texts of yoga, beginning with the Hiranyagarbha Darshan, which is considered the most ancient yogic text, which currently does not exist. There are the different limbs, 8 limbs, Ashtanga Yoga, 10 limbs, 12 limbs. There's different, various texts are mentioning different limbs, different quantity of limbs. So Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra, he, in his synthesis of the yoga process, he presents it as Ashtanga, or 8 limbs. So through Ashtanga Yoga. Now in chapter 6, Krishna will describe the process of Ashtanga Yoga in greater detail. So this is text 1 of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna said, one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated is in the renounced order of life. And he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty, which sounds rather cryptic when you think about it, but there is an explanation to what Krishna is saying here. In the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions that there are various divisions of society according to one's qualities, personal qualities, and one's action, how one acts. And he breaks it down into 4 different divisions. And the one division that he mentions is Brahman. And the Brahmins are those who live a simple lifestyle and who have a lifestyle that is predominantly in sattva gun, or in the mode of goodness. So when one is in the Brahman state or station of life, it's described that the Brahmins perform various rituals, and one of the rituals that's performed is Agnihotra. And Agnihotra means like a fire sacrifice with mantras, and it's a whole ritualistic thing that is done. So what Krishna is saying here is one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated is in the renounced order of life. So Krishna is describing real renunciation doesn't necessarily mean that you just give up everything. You leave society, you leave your responsibilities. Because someone can do that, they can leave society, leave their responsibilities, go up to a mountain cave in the Himalayas and sleep most of the day in the name of renunciation or in the name of meditation. But that's not really what renunciation is. Renunciation means giving up the sense of proprietorship or ownership or possessiveness. As I mentioned before, Rupa Goswami says that real renunciation is freedom from possessiveness. So we function in the world, but we are not of the world, in the sense that we understand that our true nature is spiritual dimension, which is eternal, knowledgeable, and full of bliss. In the material world, easily we can see that this world is temporary. In this world there is suffering, and in this world there is ignorance. So those are markers of the material dimension of our existence. And if we do not practice yoga, if we do not engage in a strategy to understand our true nature, then we are consumed by that perspective of suffering, the perspective of everything being temporary. I know I've heard people say, oh, you only have one life to live, therefore live it to the fullest. That is an element of ignorance of the soul. That's what ignorance is described as in Bhagavad Gita and other sacred texts. If you're ignorant of the other dimension or the true dimension of your existence, you're ignorant of the eternal dimension of your existence, then that will be the actual source of the suffering and the cause of attachment. Because if we see this life as the all in all of existence, what is the result of that? Well, let me get as much of it as I can in this short, what's the average age now? 76. I think with men it's younger than women. Women live, I think, to be on the average older. But let's just say the average age of 76. Okay, so I'm 73 right now. So push the panic button, right? Whatever energy I have left, push the panic button. What am I going to enjoy? But that's not what Krishna is talking about in Bhagavad Gita. He's saying that the true reality, that which has no cessation, that is our true reality. And that which has no duration is the temporary nature of our material existence. So herein, Krishna is describing, okay, you have those both dimensions. They are to be the temporary dimension of our existence, meaning the body, the mind, the senses, etc. If utilized properly, helps us to reconnect or to link up with our true nature. And that's yoga. That's what Patanjali talks about in the Yoga Sutras. Yoga is the stilling of the mind, nirodha. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha, stilling of the mind, so that we can actually come into contact or into connection with our true nature, the true nature of our existence. So here he's describing renounced order of life means not just to give up, but to engage what we have free of attachment. All of our obligations, all of our duties, all of our action, all of our work, all of our responsibilities, we do with utsaha, with enthusiasm, knowing that this is our sacrifice. This is our yajna. This is what we do and how we do it in the proper mindset, the mindset of detachment. And that is what will be the source of us linking up to our true nature of existence. And linking up to our true nature of existence, which is pretty much only what Patanjali talks about. That's really the difference between yoga as Patanjali sees it and yoga as Krishna sees it. Those are the two major yogic texts, so I mention them quite frequently side by side. Patanjali only talks about understanding and entering in the individual nature. But Krishna talks about your individual nature, the individual nature of all living entities, the spiritual nature of all living entities, and thus our connection to all life, and also linking up to the nature of the Supreme in relationship through service. So that's why Krishna is pushing Arjuna in this regard to understand that you giving up your duty, your dharma. I mean, it was the hardest when I first started reading Bhagavad Gita maybe 52 years ago. When I first started reading it, I was just like perplexed. How can this be a book of peace and love? Because that was the peace and love era. How can this book be a book of peace and love and yoga and calmness and peacefulness? It's being spoken on a battlefield. But basically, our life, it's a metaphor in part to our life. Our life is a battlefield, and Arjuna on that battlefield had challenge that he had to meet. So we, in our battlefield of life, we are meeting our challenges. And how do we meet those challenges? Do we run away from them? Do we confront them? How do we, what perspective do we look at them? As life's lessons, or as something to be ignored? In this way, the analogy is there, so it is perfectly suitable to be on the battlefield for Arjuna, to give us the lesson about life. Life as a battlefield, life is a challenge, and then Krishna is instructing Arjuna, you do what you need to do, you fulfill all your responsibilities, you only need to flick the switch and change consciousness. In other words, your approach to what you're doing. Whether it be your work, your family, your obligations as a citizen, whatever we may be doing, it's not to give it up. And that, to actually ride the parallel tracks of performing your duty, your dharma, and in connection with your eternal dharma, your eternal duty or service to the Supreme, connecting with the Supreme. That is what Krishna is telling Arjuna is real renunciation, not the fact that you're giving up duties of a Brahmin or duties of a warrior or duties of a businessman or a family man. No. Real renunciation is giving up or having freedom from thinking that these are your actions and you are entitled to the results, the fruits, the rewards of your action. And doing that, and Krishna says that is yoga. That is the yoga of renunciation. Text 2, what is called renunciation you should know to be the same as yoga. So here, Krishna is equating this mindset, this samatvam, as he describes in the second chapter, this mindset of equilibrium, steadiness, not being attached one way or the other. This steadiness, this is renunciation, and this type of renunciation is yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme. O son of Pandu, Arjuna, for one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. So imagine if you walked into a yoga studio, right? You're going to, you want to practice yoga, you heard about yoga, how it's beneficial for you, it's healthy for you, for your mind and for your body. And you walk into the yoga studio and it says there, you can never become a yogi unless you renounce the desire for sense gratification. how many people would continue? How many people would subscribe to that yoga studio? But when we talk about the philosophy, what we're dealing with here is the philosophy and psychology of yoga. Hatha yoga deals with, the asanas in order to tune the body so that it can perform meditation, opening up the channels within the body. But the psychology and philosophy of it is telling us why we are doing yoga and what mindset we do yoga in. So here, one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. It doesn't mean that we don't have gratification, but it means that our actions are connected to the Supreme because we see them as our offering. Rather than living in a me-centric world, where we live in a God-centric world, where everything we do, all that we offer, all that we give away, all the charity, all austerities that we may perform, these are all parts of our offerings. Text 3. For one who is a neophyte in the eightfold yoga system, work is said to be the means. And for one who is already elevated in yoga, cessation of all material activities is said to be the means. So here Krishna is saying there is a neophyte stage of yoga, whether it's Ashtanga yoga, Bhakti yoga, Hatha yoga, Raj yoga, whatever, there's a neophyte stage, which is different than advanced stage. So he says in the neophyte stage, work is said to be the means. So that means we are doing our duty, our dharma, with proper consciousness to link up with the Supreme. And as we advance, then cessation of all material activities is said to be the means. And again, that needs clarification. Cessation of all material activities means no connection to karma. But now your activities become akarmic, which means no reaction to the results of your actions. So your actions have to become akarmic, free from the reactions to your actions, not free from acting in this world. That Krishna is making abundantly clear to Arjuna, because at no time does Krishna say, stop your actions to Arjuna. Where in the Bhagavad Gita will you see Krishna instructing Arjuna in order for him to meet his challenge and in order for him to advance? Where do you see Krishna advising Arjuna to stop his actions? Nowhere. He says, do your duty, do your actions, do it with a different perspective. Change your perception of the world and your involvement within it. Rather than the world and your involvement within it for your own gratification, it is to be seen as acts of offerings. And that's what sacrifice is. It's an instrumental part of yoga, is to perform sacrifices for the pleasure of the Supreme. So, neophyte, beginner, you do your work, you do your duty. And then you cultivate the mindset of becoming detached from the results, enjoying the results of them. Advanced stage, cessation of all material activities. All your actions, all your thoughts become connective links to your true nature of jiva, of soul, and to the Supreme Soul, Paramatma, the Supreme Lord, within the core of your heart. There's a nice analogy that's used in the Mundaka Upanishad and the Svetashvatara Upanishad, and that analogy is two birds sitting in a tree. And the one bird is looking at the fruits and trying to enjoy, and the other bird is sitting next to that bird. And then when that first bird who's trying to enjoy the fruits of the tree realizes it's a fruitless endeavor, then he turns to the second bird for assistance. So this is what Arjuna did. He realizes that involvement without connection, viyoga, in the world is the cause of confusion and bewilderment and suffering. So therefore he turns to Krishna, who is sitting right next to him. And in all of our situations, our awareness, our ability to perceive things is coming from our soul, but then they're seated. Let me use the proper tense here. Seated next to the soul is the Supreme Soul. And then when one makes or has a conscious awareness of that relationship, then one turns to that Supreme Soul for guidance. Sarvasya chaham ridi sani vishto atak smritya jnanam aponamcha. Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita in the 15th chapter that super soul within the heart, seated next to the soul which is giving awareness to the body, is the source of knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness, depending on your approach. And that really is a very important point in the process of yoga. What is your intention? What is the purpose of your approach? If it's to get a nice body, okay, you can perform Hatha Yoga, you perform asana and pranayama, and you will certainly get a healthy body. But if you want something that will bring you beyond the body and body concept, because we know no matter how healthy we make our body through exercise or asana or pranayama, no matter how healthy we have it, eventually it's going to deteriorate and eventually disappear. So that recognition, that understanding. I was where was I? I went to a place, a store or something, and there were several people, elderly people, and they were standing there, and I keep having this gnawing thought about what are they going to think of at the time of death? Because what we are cultivating now in terms of our thoughts is actually going to be the director at the time of death. So if someone comes down to Florida, moves down to Florida from New York or New Jersey, like so many thousands do, and they're just looking for, an enjoyable retirement, but that really is not the ultimate goal of life. Certainly it's not a bad thing after working hard to retire, but how do you use your retirement so that you are cultivating a mindset at the point of death that will help you to advance beyond this mortal world into our true spiritual nature in relationship with the Supreme. And how many people are actually thinking like that? So it's rare. I applaud those of you that are attending, taking the time out to attend this class out of curiosity or seeking further knowledge, or maybe just stressed out and looking for an answer, whatever the motivation is. It's because if we continue studying, knowledge is a very, very important thing. Knowledge helps us, guides us. What is Arjuna seeking when he turns to Krishna for answers? He's looking for knowledge. He's looking for Krishna to impart his wisdom so that he can actually see the real purpose of life. Text 4. A person is said to be elevated in yoga. So Krishna now is giving, as he did in the previous chapter, he's giving us symptoms of one who is elevated in yoga. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, because if you remember, In the second one, one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. So Krishna is saying the symptom is when one is elevated in yoga, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. Symptom of one who is making that transition from beginning stages of yoga, initial understanding of yoga, to a more a deeper understanding of what yoga is and the purpose of life. 5, one must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. And then he goes on to explain that. 6, for him who has conquered the mind is the best friend, best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. There's a story in this regard. A man discovers this lamp, and it's a very beautiful lamp, golden lamp, and he rubs the lamp, and lo and behold, a genie appears. And the man asks, are you a genie? Yes, I am. Can you fulfill wishes or desires? Yes, I can. He said, however, I will fulfill all your desires, the genie says, but once you stop engaging me, then I will cut you to pieces. So the man's thinking, I have so many desires, I can unlimitedly engage this genie in fulfilling all my desires. So the man begins to, I want the biggest mansion, in the universe. Genie says, so be it. And the man keeps going on and on and on with all the desires, both little and great. But after a period of time, the man begins to realize, I'm running out of desires. So, he's straining, and he's got all the money he needs. He's got the house that he wants. He's got the spouse that he wants. He's got the power that he wants. He's got all these. He's running out of desires, and he's starting to freak out. Because the genie said, okay, I will fulfill all your desires, but once you stop engaging me, I will cut you to pieces. So finally the man comes to the point where he can no longer issue any desire to be fulfilled, and the genie cuts him to pieces. So that story is used as a comparison to our mind. Our mind, as long as it's engaged, positively, then it's our best friend. But if we don't engage our mind, then what's that saying? Idleness is the devil's workshop. And there's a lot of other sayings indicating the same thing, that if you don't engage the mind will get the best of you. So that's how it becomes the worst enemy. That if we don't engage it properly, the mind, then the mind gets us. So that's why in yoga, one of the quintessential points of yoga is to control the mind. And here, Krishna says, the mind can be your best friend. When you control it, all things are possible. All things can be accomplished. But when you don't control it, then it can become your worst enemy. It can be the constant cause of disturbance. And we can see ourselves in our own life, when our mind gets the best of us, or our mind begins to run wild, either through desires or disturbances, then it's very difficult to control, and it causes a great deal of suffering. So that's why Krishna says, best friend, but you have to control it. Worst enemy when you don't. And most people do not even know what the mind is and the various workings of the mind. That's why the philosophy of yoga has a psychological dimension to it, so that we know what the mind is and how the mind works. Because that's another aspect of knowledge. An aspect of knowledge is to know what to expect and what not to expect. What is the goal and what is to be avoided, because it will serve as an impediment to the goal. That requires knowledge. Sometimes people, in approaching yoga, they really want to accept everything, commit to nothing. But that's not the point of yoga. The point of yoga is to be able to use the intelligence to discriminate. According to Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, the mind, the overarching principles called chitta, has mind, which is the receptacle for all data coming in through the senses, and then it categorizes and memorizes, and it has all these different functions that it performs. And then another dimension to the overarching mind is intelligence, which is discriminatory power. So now, we have this intelligence, so we can distinguish between what should be done and what should not be done. And that's what knowledge is. It tells us this is beneficial, this is detrimental. And you see, Patanjali mentions yamas and niyamas, right? This kind of a lifestyle, both internal and external, that if you live it in this particular way, it makes it easier to perform yoga. Also in Bhakti Yoga, Rupa Goswami talks about 6 items which are detrimental to Bhakti Yoga and 6 items which are beneficial to Bhakti Yoga. That's discrimination. If you do like this, Atyahara Prayasascha Prajalpa Niyamagraha, if you do like that, if you overeat, if you over-endeavor, if you speak, if you use your tongue to speak nonsense, in this way, those are detrimental to your yogic advancement, particularly on the path of bhakti. But if you're enthusiastic, if you're patient, if you're determined, if you are following rules and regulations for the sake of advancement along your path, if you're associating with advanced practitioners and you're avoiding those who have no interest in advancement along a spiritual path, those are things which are beneficial. But it takes purified intelligence to see, to understand those things. And that's why there's emphasis on philosophy and psychology in yoga, in order to fully realize the true power of yoga, what yoga can do for you as an individual. So that's an important thing to consider. Text 7. For one who has conquered the mind, the supersoul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. So just like Patanjali describes, yogas chitta vritti narodaha, attain tranquility, calmness, peacefulness, and you understand your nature. Krishna takes it a step further. For one who has conquered the mind, narodaha, he's calm, peaceful, the supersoul is already reached. That you live in your spiritual nature and you are able to connect with that divine presence that is also accompanying you within your heart. To such a person, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. In other words, when heat is there, okay, we're hot. And when cold is there, we're cold. But those are just really sensations. It's like blowing on the skin. It's a sensation. It's there and it's gone. And with the blowing on, you can feel a cool sensation, or you can feel a hot sensation. Those are sensations. So one who can tolerate those sensations can become peaceful, Krishna says. To such a man who is in this state of tranquility, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor, all the same. Previously, in the second chapter, Krishna gives a hint at how one could advance, and what he said was tolerance. You tolerate heat and you tolerate cold. You tolerate happiness and you tolerate distress. You tolerate honor and dishonor because they're all there, they're all the same, they will all come and go, just as the changing seasons. If you live up in Massachusetts and you freak out because it's winter, then look how miserable your life will be. So how do people live in Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Maine and Canada, where temperatures can get brutally cold? Tolerate. They learn to tolerate. And even though it's brutally cold, then they somehow or another can deal with it. So Krishna says, deal with the dualities that are there. Tolerate them. They're there, they will come, they will go. Like winter will come, and then winter will bleed into spring, spring into summer, summer into fall, and then fall again into winter. Except in Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean, where it's always eternally spring, summer. So a person is said to be established in self-realization and is called a yogi or mystic when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. So Krishna says that fulfillment, because it's not a question of just glimmers of happiness. It's a question of fulfillment. So Krishna here is saying, one becomes fully satisfied, content, santosh. One becomes fully content, fulfilled, by virtue of acquired knowledge that Krishna has been giving us from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 18. He's giving us the knowledge of the soul. By virtue of that knowledge and realization, because knowledge has to ripen into realization. And what does that mean? Knowledge may be the information, it may be the understanding of this information, but it also means you live your life, you assimilate it into your life, and that brings realization. Like for instance, if we say we're soul, spirit soul, and we have to act according to that spiritual nature, okay, so what does that mean? That's where knowledge comes in. How do you act according to your by acting in relationship to the Supreme. That is the constitution of the soul. And when we act accordingly, then we gain realization of that. We begin to see, the more I do like that, the more I'm acting in relationship to the mindset of my actions are my offerings to the Supreme. The more we realize that that is going to be the source of peaceful mind, tranquility, and fulfillment. Not just a quick hit of sense gratification, the results of a pleasant sensory interaction. Because that happens and then it goes. Right? You experience something and then the experience is over. And then you're looking for another experience. As opposed to the steadiness and the consistency of which comes from acquired knowledge and then acting according to that acquired knowledge and having that mature into realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. It feeds into, the more we act according to acquired knowledge, and the more mature we become by virtue of that knowledge into assimilation, realization, then again, the desire for knowledge is increased. And then the enthusiasm and determination to assimilate that into our life increases. And it feeds into one another and helps us to maintain a desire, a hunger, a greed for this wisdom, this knowledge about the nature of the soul and its relationship with the Supreme Soul. It really gives us the inspiration. Inspiration is very important for us to continue our path. How are we going to continue for the rest of our life and plow through old age and infirmity? Because we have an inspiration. We've incorporated into our life, we've assimilated, and we've experienced the fulfillment that comes from it, and the tranquility that comes from it. Try to understand this point, because it will provide an inspiration and a ever-increasing desire to build upon this foundation. It's one thing, building a foundation, but then you build upon the foundation. That's how you get a full building. You set the foundation and then you build the floors, and you can build, depending on the footprint, the size and the strength of the foundation determines how big a building, how high a building you can build. So depending on how we follow the principles of our yoga system, that will provide a very, very strong foundation that we can build upon. And each floor is another level of realization. And what does that do, this knowledge? It gets rid of doubt. Doubt is one of the obstacles, one of the impediments to yoga. What am I doing this for? I'm performing my sadhana every morning, getting up early, I'm spending time. What's the point of all this? So when doubt assails us, knowledge can get rid of that doubt, and we can continue with great determination our progressive path forward. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it be pebbles, stones, or gold, as the same. So everything in this world is of this world and is temporary by nature. So we don't really place value by distinction. Oh, this is a stone and this is gold. We're not attached and driven by that. We see that all of it is temporary in its nature, and the real gold, the real jewels, are contained within the core of our heart, in relationship with the Supreme. And there's the story of Dhruva. I don't know how many, I see some of you out there, Ishwari and probably Gayatri and others, are familiar with the story of Dhruva. But Dhruva was a 5-year-old boy. He was a prince, son of King Uttanapanada. And he wanted some affection from his father. So he wanted to sit on his father's lap. But his stepmother, because the king had 2 wives, so the first wife, who was the favored wife, had a son. And she, of course, she favored her son. So Dhruva was not her son. Dhruva was the son of the second wife. So she would not let Dhruva sit on the lap of his father. And because Uttanapada did not want to create problems, he didn't say anything when she prevented him from sitting on his lap. Dhruva became very angry. And because he was a Kshatriya, he was of warrior stock and warrior blood, he used this anger to determinedly perform yoga. Because his mom told him, the only way that you really get your heart's desire is to approach the Supreme. And that way, when you approach the Supreme, you get your heart's desire. So Dhruva in that stage, in that immature stage, interpreted that to mean he'll get his kingdom. So he went out to the forest and he performed for years severe austerities, and finally, by virtue of these austerities, he came in contact with the Supreme. And he was chanting the mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Some of you who are into Kirtan may have heard that mantra before in Kirtan. Know that mantra to be very ancient mantra, because this particular pastime of Dhruva was many, many, many centuries ago. So Dhruva, in performing his austerities and chanting that mantra, he came face to face with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when he was face to face with this divine Supreme Person, he realized, he experienced a fulfillment that was beyond anything in this world. And he had at that point realization that anything I want to acquire in this world is just like broken glass. It may look like jewels, it may look like it has value, but in actuality, because it's temporary, it does not have real value. The real value was in his linking up to the Supreme. And the experience of the happiness and fulfillment and tranquility and bliss in relationship to that linking up into that connection. Then Dhruva said, that is the real gem of existence, not any type of material acquisition. So that's a lesson for us, that we have this energy. No matter what age you are, you have energy. You're endowed with a certain degree of energy. How you use it. Just like if you get an inheritance, like many people get inheritances. And an intelligent person properly utilizes that inheritance so that it doesn't diminish, but it grows. An unintelligent person squanders it. So we have this energy. Now, we can squander it by just trying to use it to gain gratification from my sense interaction with the objects of the senses. We could squander the energy like that. And what do we have at the time of death when we virtually have no energy? What is the result of that? A karmic debt, a karmic burden that we must experience. Whether it's good or bad karma, we have to experience it. It means another body, another time, another sentence in this material world. As opposed to, not squandering what we're given and utilizing it properly. Utilizing all of our energy and all that we do, all that we offer, all that we give away, all austerities, everything as an offering to the Supreme. So that's the difference. And the end result of that is Jagnartat Karmano Nyatra. No more involvement in this material world. But squandering is Lokoyam Karma Bandhana. That you perform actions that cause your further entanglement within this world. It's like a spider web. If you are an insect and you come in contact with a spider web, the more you struggle. If you've ever watched, as a young boy, like a lot of young kids have fascinations with spiders. I would watch, sometimes a fly would get into the web and the fly would be very frantic, because initially it feels the stickiness of it and the spider just waits. And then the more frantic the fly becomes, the more he becomes bound up by the web. And then eventually the spider comes over. So in this material world, the more frantic we are for gratification of the I want more and more, the more we become entangled. It's a trap. I see with my son, he asked, "Oh, Daddy, can I go on the computer?" Because we really restrict him on the computer. So my wife and I give him little measured amounts of involvement on the computer, but I could see what it does is it heightens his desire. It doesn't satisfy him. It heightens his desire to be on more and more, and he looks for more and more ways, more and more reasons to be on the computer. So certainly there is something experienced when we interact within this world. There's some little sense of pleasure, but it's not fulfilling, and therefore we continue, we push and we push. More and more. More money, more power, more and more. That quantity is not satisfying, doesn't fulfill. I'll read one more verse. A person is considered still further advanced. So Krishna is showing higher and higher levels of advancement. Further advanced when he regards honest well-wishers, affectionate benefactors, the neutral, mediators, the envious, friends and enemies, the pious and the sinners, all with an equal mind. Knowing, and this is my addendum to that, knowing that whatever way a person is acting, whether a sinner or a saint, whether someone who is a friend or an enemy, it's due to the influence of the gunas that's affecting them in a particular way, causing them to act in such a way to become your enemy, or act in such a way that becomes your friend. Oftentimes, friendship on a superficial level is based on the mirror philosophy. You look at that person, do you see yourself? And when we see things that are very similar, then, oh, okay, you become my friend. Or you're enabling me in such a way that you're providing me what I want, and that's your friend. But I remember one friend saying, I know who you are and I still love you. Something to that effect. I know who you are, I know your faults, I know your strengths, and even though I know your faults, I still love you. And that's friendship in that way. That we see that whatever your weaknesses may be, your faults may be, maybe influence of the residual effects of the mode of ignorance or passion. Okay, so I will stop here, 8 o'clock, and I will ask, does anyone have any questions, comments, observations, would you like to start any kind of dialogue about what has been said? Please push the button or whatever you do to get noticed. Raise your hand, push the button.
Hare Krishna. So I wanted to ask, so all of these experiences, feelings of hot and cold, or like comfortable, not comfortable, that's the soul which is experiencing all of this hot, cold, other types of feelings.
No, the soul is aware of it through the medium of the body, the mind, the senses. There's awareness. Oh, this is heat and this is cold. Now, when the awareness is muddied, the intelligence is contaminated, then it sees it as me. I'm hot. I'm cold. And you can see when anyone who's like easily affected, like I know somebody who's very easily affected by hot and cold and any kind of change, and there are innumerable changes in their sense. So what it is the soul experiences that, doesn't really feel discomfort of heat or cold, but it can perceive through the awareness that is coming through the intelligence, and that's a sensation that's affecting my external dimension. But if you don't see that you have an external dimension, you think it's you, that's why heat, cold, happiness, distress affects so strongly. Not really happening to the soul. The soul is free from that. But the soul as a witness, the soul as an observer, the soul as the driver of the yantra, rudhani, maya, the machine made of material energy, is experiencing it through the mind. In other words, experiencing means is aware of the sensation. Now, if we're thinking we're our body, then we become attached to what that sensation is producing within my exterior dimension. Is that clear?
Mm-hmm. So the soul is experiencing it through its consciousness. Because the soul has consciousness, that's why it can experience these things.
Right. And that's what motivates what we got, what Krishna calls the machine made of material energy. Your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, your sense of touch, all of these things are occurring because you have the awareness, consciousness, which is throughout your body coming from the soul. Death simply means the consciousness leaves the body because the soul leaves the body. And therefore that's death. No more action coming from the eyes, the nose, and then what is it? They're still there. The eyes are still there. Doesn't matter at what age one passes away, the eyes are still there, the nose is still there, the mouth is there, the ears are there, the hands are there. All of these things that we experience, the external world, are still there, but there's no experience of it. Because that which experiences it through the mechanism is gone, along with the consciousness. Is that clear, Kaiji?
Yes. So can we say that the soul and consciousness, they're two different categories?
Well, much like the sun and the sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
In one sense, yes, they're two different categories. In other words, you can experience sunshine without the sun. If you're sitting in your room and the sunshine's streaming into your room, you may not necessarily see the sun. So in that way, you could say that's sunshine. But they're actually, connected. There is no sunshine without the sun. There is no consciousness without the jiva. And ultimately, there is no consciousness in the jiva without the super consciousness, supreme consciousness, which is infusing everything with this consciousness, everything that's living in varying degrees of life forms has varying degrees of consciousness depending on what is the vehicle, what is the mechanism. You know, if you're driving, if you're on roller skates, you can do things, you can have motivation, you can move at a certain speed and certain distance, but you can't do what you're doing in a car. So a body, you know, depending on the nature of the body, a tree body, an insect body, a dog body, a cat body, can do things, they have consciousness and can do certain things, but there's limitations placed on what the consciousness can do depending on where it's situated. So the human form of life, consciousness is most acute, and therefore it describes that the human form of life is meant for self-realization.
So basically, what you are saying, without the super soul, super soul is everything which keeps together, like the material body, the subtle body, and you know, because of the super soul, we can experience all of that, and it keeps us together. Otherwise, we would not be able to exist if there was no.
Yes, because Krishna says that in the Gita, I'm the source of knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. That comes from Krishna. So even when you want to forget about God and your relationship with God, that comes from the very personality you want to forget. Just fulfilling your desire in that way.
Okay, and I wanted to ask, so since we are talking about this yama niyama, and there is this pranayama, right, like deep breathing, I know that, for example, we as a soul, we are located in these 5 pranas in the area with, you know, near the heart, where there are these 5 pranas meet each other. And because of this pranayama, that like, does it have to do anything that like we are breathing, or somehow that we, with these 5 types of prana and where we are located, that we can, you know, get our mind more calm or something?
Well, it's all about balance. That's what Ayurveda is. Ayurveda is balancing of the airs. And, you know, you have the prana, upana, all the different 5 airs that you mentioned, and they have to be in balance and to perform their function properly. And when they get out of balance, so methods of like pranayama, etc., help to bring that into balance. And when one comes into balance, that's where the more the peaceful state of mind is.
So that's, for example, with outer methods, like, you know, even Ayurveda and pranayama or yoga, we are balancing those flow of the air where we are situated.
Yeah, that's part of what it does, yes. But you know, according to Ayurveda, you have Vata, Pitta, Kapha. You have the airs, you have fire, they do dominant functions within the framework of the body. So you know, depending on what your dosha is or your doshas, what there's a certain balance that you have to bring to it, and that's what Ayurveda does. Ayurveda helps you to bring it into balance. When the body's in balance and it functions like it should. I mean, body and mind has tremendous capacity to heal, and we're just obstructing it by doing activities and diet, lifestyle that is continually exacerbating the situation and bringing us more and more out of balance. And then disease occurs.
I have one more question. So one of my yoga teachers, who also read this Patanjali sutras, told me that when we are, for example, when we have done the yoga practice, the physical yoga practice, and we are lying down in shavasana, that state of mind when we our body doesn't disturb us, and we don't feel cold, don't feel hot, we are not hungry, not thirsty, and we don't in shavasana, when we don't think of our problem, and you kind of have this mental quietness in your mind where you don't feel anything that is disturbing you, and your mind like stops in that point of time. That's the closest we can be to yoga, to connecting to the supreme.
Well, I would say that gives you a glimpse into what it appears to be. One thing you have to understand is Patanjali's goal from his perspective of yoga is different than what Krishna's perspective is, or at least it's only focused on realization of the self, whereas Krishna also wants you to realize the true nature of the self and then engage that nature of the self in service to the Supreme. So Krishna is actually asking us that when he says, Manmana Baba Mad Bhakto, always think of me, engage in service to me, worship me, become my devotee, like that. And that way you will link up. But in answer to your question, direct answer to your question, yeah, little experiences like that give us glimpses of the goal of yoga practice, according to Patanjali.
So when I look at this 8-step yoga system, I feel like it's more physical description of maybe like a trance of something. When you physically experience, like, they talk that the person can concentrate on one object for half an hour or so, and, get into trance or something. That's one kind of experience. But when the person is engaged in bhakti yoga and is in doing something for the Supreme, that's a totally different experience.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there is smaranam in bhakti, where one has different levels of full concentration on meditation, because bhakti is both contemplative and active. There's a contemplative side to bhakti in terms of our meditation on Gayatri, our meditation on japa, even our meditation in kirtan. There's a contemplative dimension to it. But bhakti also has an active dimension to it, like cooking, and cooking an offering for the Supreme, as an offering to the Supreme. So that's an active dimension.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for all your answers. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Anybody else would like to ask anything or make a comment or observation? Please feel free to do so. No one else? Okay.
Question, Lakshmi,
Yes, Sid.
what is jiva?
Jiva is the soul.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the introduction to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's Gita, he talks about there are 5 subject matters of the Gita. Ishvara, which is God; Jiva, the soul; Prakriti, which is the material energy; Karma, which is the action within the material world; and Kala, time. So Jiva is actually the soul.
Mm-hmm. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your kind attention and your participation. It was wonderful having your association this evening. So next Wednesday we'll continue where we left off, chapter 6, verse 10 in the Bhagavad Gita. Until that time, have a happy, healthy, and holy week ahead of you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.